Hey everybody, just a heads up. This one is going to cover some especially spicy subject matter. Like, this warning you get on the splash screen doesn't quite do it justice. This game isn't sold on Steam in Germany, the Swedish government tried to ban it, this game is outright illegal to own or sell in New Zealand, and it was featured in a Black Eyed Peas music video. That's right folks, today we're playing the extremely online Facebook mommy's greatest fear, Postal 2. So what is Postal 2? In short, it's a first-person shooter adventure game set in the open world of Paradise, Arizona, where you play as someone known only as the Postal Dude, who's just trying to get his weekly errands done. Postal 2 was made by one Running with Scissors, and is a sequel to isometric violence sim Postal. Postal 2 came out in 2003 to middle to low reviews across the board and near universal outcry by any group that describes themselves as concerned anything. Middling to low reviews, you say? But if that's the case, why does this game have an overwhelmingly positive review score on Steam with nearly 50,000 reviews? Well, that's because while the game was a hot mess on its initial release, Running with Scissors steadily added more and more content to Postal 2 over a decade, tweaking things and improving the game with including multiplayer, an expansion, new jokes and small bits of content slipped in here and there throughout the base game, and eventually in 2015 they released a huge expansion that's the size of the base game called Paradise Lost, which is essentially Postal 2.5 and makes up for a game that Running with Scissors didn't even make, and we're not going any further into that, so don't ask. Postal 2 was greenlit onto Steam in 2014, which means that the version of Postal 2 that most recent players got was a vastly improved version that was almost immediately followed up with one of the best expansions to a game I've seen. Like seriously, Postal 2 is War of the Chosen levels of new content, and RWS essentially pulled a No Man's Sky before No Man's Sky was even launched. Okay, now that the history's out of the way, let me give you all one last warning before we get into the game proper. Postal 2 is not for the faint of heart. If any of these things that are scrolling past you on the screen are deal breakers for you, I suggest clicking away from this video and rewatching a previous video of mine or something, because while I'm going to try and do this as tastefully as possible, it's Postal 2. You know what? Screw it. If there was ever a place to give my opinion over the debate that is if video games cause violence, it'd be here. We're gonna gloss over a lot of stuff here for brevity's sake, and also I'd like to politely but firmly remind you all to please remember that I am the Charlatan wonder, not the PhD in criminal psychology wonder. Everything I talk about here should be considered poorly interpreted at best and most likely outright wrong, and it would be best practice to do your own research on this topic with the assistance of someone formally educated in the relevant fields. Let's do this. Over the years, as video games became more and more realistic, widespread, and graphic, much like any other form of new media, concerned everything groups started making video games a new thing they publicly clutched their pearls at, especially whenever they were up for re-election. And it certainly didn't help to dissuade these groups of their assertions that the Harris-Wads were a thing. I'm just going to leave that one up on the screen and let you Google that on your own, as I'm trying to complete the Herculean task of discussing a controversial subject without getting demonetized, and I find that the certain other big C is a one-way ticket to a yellow dollar sign. Over the last 3 decades, there have been various studies on a potential for a correlation or causality between violent video games and acts of violence in the real world. Which of these studies is brought up and given validity depends entirely on who is bringing up these studies. Video game advocates, like the ones that present themselves as pitch-shifted cartoon characters extolling whatever they think will get them woke points this year, tend to cite the ones that show no causality between video games and violence, whereas criminal justice-oriented groups tend to favor the ones that show a link between competitive games and increased level of aggression, similar to how one gets when playing a competitive sport. In my experience as someone who loves violent video games yet has no urges to commit acts of violence whatsoever, yet also for a time was trying to get a criminology degree before everything went to hell in my life, these studies are all over the place, which likely has something to do with the circumstances of each of these studies varying quite a bit. There seem to be 2 theories that have been applied to make sense of all these. One, catharsis theory, which admittedly went out of the good graces of psychology with Freud and posits that the act of doing something aggressive like working out or hammering nails will help get the aggression out of your system. This has been essentially replaced with the idea that you should do something you find relaxing, such as playing an intense video game to get out your aggression, which still kind of works in this situation. The other theory is that playing an intense video game that simulates violent acts will spur impressionable minds such as children to act more aggressively in common situations. The bottom line here is that no one has been able to nail down a causality one way or another after decades of study, while people will interpret the data to their own ends. Criminal justice advocates interpret one thing here because it could be a way to decrease crime, while video game advocates interpret it as another way to decrease the scrutiny over their medium. Where do I stand? Well, in all of my community college education, I think there might be a reverse causality going on here. I believe it's not an if A then B situation, with A being playing violent video games and B being a tendency towards violent acts, but instead an if B then A situation. So it's not, if you play violent video games, you will have a tendency towards violence, but more likely, if you have a tendency towards violence, you will play violent video games. This all hinges on the truth table logic that if one thing leads to another, then the opposite is invalid. However, the end result can be triggered by something other than the causing factor as seen in this truth table here. This assertion that violent tendencies attract one to violent video games seems to line up better to the realities of our world than the other way around. But remember, I'm working with a community college level education here and overtly present myself as a charlatan. Scrutinize this information for yourself and do not take what I say to be the gospel or even so much as relatively accurate. So now let's actually talk about how Postal 2 plays. Just to get one thing clear here, we're going to be playing a more recent version of Postal 2 and not the 2003 original. I don't even know if it's possible to play Postal 2 as it originally was made, nor do I know why anyone would want to do that. So first thing here is your general shooties, slashies, and bonkies. Postal 2 has a lot of weapons to be found and used, ranging from a shovel that you'll find just outside of your trailer, to the absurdly powerful sawed-off shotgun, to literal weapons of mass destruction. Not all weapons are created equal though, and you'll find that some aren't even worth using unless you're put in a situation where there is nothing else to use, and that some of the weapons are really finicky. The default shotgun, for example, will take half a dozen body shots to kill a normal guy at paper airplane throwing range, but a headshot at point blank will insta-jib everyone except for endgame enemies. The machete might cut through everything like butter, but some enemies need smashing damage to be killed, or vice versa. Sometimes the use of fire is an extremely efficient way to take out enemies, but other times it's just going to end up damaging only you, as certain baddies can only die in one way, and they'll just end up charging into you while on fire, which will set you on fire. By the way, the main method of putting yourself out when you're on fire is to pee straight into the air, so have fun with that. Then there's the enemies you're going up against in Postal 2, which is pretty much everyone. Your former employers at Running with Scissors, the clergy, the police, random schmoes, protesters, rednecks, hostile wildlife, postal workers, butchers, the ATF, cultists, the National Guard, Al-Qaeda, the living dead, and so on. At some point or another, pretty much everyone is going to consider you shoot on sight, and the game is nice enough to keep a list of people that hate you on the map screen. Most enemies are susceptible to normal ways of severing their divine link, but others, like the National Guard, the stalkers from the expansion pass, piss robots, and zombies will need to be taken out with a lot more firepower or in a very specific manner. Additionally, most acts of violence will get the police on your case, and so long as you're not exercising your Second Amendment rights against the police, you'll be thrown in the slammer if you drop your weapon and hold still. Alternatively, you can just run away and go sit quietly in a corner for about 2 minutes, and everyone will forget that you just chucked a machete like a boomerang to dismember half of the local marching band. Heck, if you're sly, you can find a police uniform to don and be mostly immune to getting in trouble for your actions. Since everyone will have a reason to try and put you in the dirt eventually, you're gonna need to keep your health up just like in any other video game. There's your good old-fashioned first aid kits that are sporadically peppered about the game world, but it's kinda hard to rely on those as they are few and far between, as well as something that the postal dude will consume instantly upon pickup. If you want to have something on your person to patch yourself up in the middle of the fight, you've got a few options. The first few are various fast food items that you can find or buy just about everywhere in the game. These are things like donuts, which can heal only a smidget of health, but can also be dropped to bait unsuspecting police officers. Slices of pizza that heal about 5 HP that can also be dropped to try and befriend dogs if you're out of biscuits. And finally, some things of fast food, cheeseburgers or something that will heal a full 10 points of health upon consumption. And then we've got health pipes. They're one of the most expensive items in the game, but can be found in all sorts of nooks and crannies as long as you keep your eyes open. Health pipes will instantly overheal the dude to 125% health and will elicit a "this can't be good for me, but I feel great" from the postal dude. Be careful though, as once you start using health pipes, you're going to have to keep using them unless you want to have withdrawal symptoms, which will take a big chunk out of your health pool at usually what is the most inconvenient time possible. So if you're going to start using health pipes, make sure you have a plan to get more. In the game, that is. Don't do drugs, kids. The game takes place in the open world of Paradise, Arizona. That has various areas cordoned off until you hit certain milestones, but there's still plenty to see and do, even with certain parts of the map being inaccessible until you hit a certain day. Postal 2 is divvied up into days of the week with various errands making up your objectives, which range from getting the milk to bringing your uncle a birthday present in the middle of an ATF raid on his cult compound. I find that the simpler the mission, the more off the rails it gets. The missions go from Monday to Friday, Friday in the base game, plus Saturday and Sunday in Apocalypse Weekend. And for the most part, you can approach your daily chores in any order you see fit. There's also multiple ways to do each quest. A good example of this is that on Monday, after you get your paycheck from running with scissors, you can patiently wait in the line at the bank, give the teller your check, and have it cashed just in time to be in the wrong place at the wrong time during a bank robbery. Or if the line's just taking too long for your taste, or maybe the teller won't serve you for some reason, you can just walk into the back of the bank and cash the check yourself. You should be careful about the latter though, as in that case, you'll be the bank robber, and the police are going to have a surprisingly good response time for a bank that just leaves their vault open and unguarded all day. On top of all the errands you gotta run, there's a whole lot to see and do in Paradise that's entirely unrelated to your main quest. You can go check out the local 24-hour nightclub, see the neighborhood nearby RWS, or see what's up at the mall. Maybe explore the abnormally large sewer system that every video game has for some reason, or just see what people on the street are up to, which is usually random acts of violence. Heck, if you've got enough time on your hands, you can explore the sewer system enough to find a secret passage to Tora Bora, which turns out was in Arizona. Storm Al-Qaeda's secret base, free the prisoner of war, and defeat Al-Qaeda while securing the WMD that were totally there in the first place before we got to the point that the war has gone on for so long that children that were born after the events of 9/11 are now serving tours of duty in said war. So if it wasn't clear already about what you can do and how you can go about your missions in Postal 2, the game takes everything and makes it as absurdly violent and dirty as possible. The billboards around town are either overtly insulting anyone who looks at them or not so shy about how terrible the company's advertising on them are, and all the stores in the mall have names like Turdines, Toys in the Hood, or a coming soon location for some sort of sorority dungeon. Then there's how anywhere that you can make it ridiculous with your weapons, it's made ridiculous. Your shotgun is called the Mansweeper. You can throw your machete like a boomerang. You have access to a diseased cow head that throwing at people will make them violently ill and is most likely the cause of the zombification that starts happening towards the weekend. And you silence your weapons not with a traditional silencer or some sort of oil filter, but instead by attaching some poor cat to the barrel of your gun. I for one did not do this, so I don't have any footage of that. Speaking of cats, on top of calming down stray cats enough for you to pick them up, the Postal Dude can use catnip to slow down time a la Max Payne just in case you need to get an edge on a lot of people that want you gone. Now, despite all that was previously mentioned and how the game seems to constantly nudge you towards turning your local phone book into an obituary listing, all the violence is entirely optional and it's entirely doable to play the game on a sort of pacifist run. There are non-lethal weapons like the taser or just shouting at people until they go away. There's also nothing stopping you from just patiently waiting in line until it's your turn to see the priest or the poor sod manning the counter and paying your bills without a fuss. Even when confronted with people that have decided that you are shoot on sight, you can just run towards the nearest police officer and let the law take care of the criminals. And if the police are the ones giving you trouble, you can just drop your weapon and let yourself be arrested. You can also get through the entire game without exposing yourself to anyone that isn't a medical professional for the purpose of a health examination, and no one is forcing you to use those health pipes you get throughout the game. Postal 2 is only as violent and nasty as the player is willing to let the game be. Something I think that has really helped with the surrounding moral panic of Postal 2 is that the humor and references within are very dated. I hate to make assumptions here, but I get a feeling that most of the people who like to shout cancel or boycott on Twitter weren't around for the early 2000s and probably have no idea what the Postal Dude is alluding to when he implies that the local fast food joint gets its beef from England, or the statements being made when the Postal Dude goes to vote in his local election. I have nothing against the Zoomers, and I'm perfectly content with them hating millennials just like me for the generational divide, as that's just the way of things. And by the same logic I'm presenting here, I probably wouldn't know a whole lot about referential political humor from the 70s and early 80s when I was in my teens or early 20s, outside of what might have been referenced in my high school's history curriculum. The majority of the referential humor in Postal 2 falls into that Goldilocks zone of obscurity where it's too old for any current comedians or news outlets to be making fun of it or talking about it, but it's not quite old enough yet to hit the 20-year mark where historians will start scrutinizing it, starting it on the path to be something that is discussed in history books for public education purposes. As a point of reference, this year, 2021, is going to be the 20-year mark for the events of 9/11, and that's when the historical scrutiny is going to start coming in, or at least what I understand it to be. As I understand it, like you gotta wait 20 years for serious historical scrutiny, but again, I am the charlatan wonder. There's also something to be said about disavowing any media from our past that makes our present selves uncomfortable or does not hold up to current moral standards of the day, and that can be a dangerous mindset, or that the erasure of the nastier parts of our culture can lead to those same things being repeated in the future out of ignorance and ironically cause a backslide in social justice and equality, spurred by a misguided attempt at advancing social justice inequality, or how in spite of all of this, some media from the past is overtly meant to be hateful and has no redeeming value even at its time of publication, but it should still exist for the previously mentioned reasoning, but should be annotated to make it clear to whoever is consuming that media today that the media was made for the purpose of spreading hate, and warn them that this media prevents malevolent ideologies in a persuasive manner so that they do not fall into the trap of accidentally reviving old and hateful ideologies. However, this is a YouTube video showcasing and critiquing a game that is clearly satirical, and I'm not that kind of video essayist, so you guys are gonna have to look elsewhere for discussion on that. Postal 2's satirical nature ensures that everyone, and I mean everyone, gets mocked over the course of the week. Both the left and the right, consumerism, political activism, celebrities, people who play video games, the people that are making video games, the Postal franchise itself, public institutions, friends and enemies all alike are lampooned to the highest degree, and no one gets out of Postal 2 unmocked. Heck, even Civi 11, who was my first exposure to Postal 2 the way it is now, and likely a whole lot of other people's first exposure to Postal 2 and getting them playing it, gets clowned on a bit in Postal 4. A good way to think of it is like a modified version of Rule 34, which, if it exists, running with scissors will make fun of it in the Postal series. One last thing I want to talk about concerning the content of Postal 2 is that while it's certainly edgy by anyone's definition, the Postal dude is about as far away from the edgelord icon the Joker that one can get. Sure, they both find themselves in a lot of violent situations, but where the Joker had one bad day and decided to go completely nuts, the Postal dude had 7 bad days, and while he is a self-described psychopath, he doesn't unnecessarily escalate the level of violence unless you, the player, make him. He'll even say that out loud when he gets arrested by the military during Apocalypse Weekend. A lot of crazy stuff happens to the Postal dude during our time with him, but he just goes with it. Aside from some stuff in the expansions that you're kind of railroaded into, the Postal dude never sets out with violence in mind. He just wants to get his car fixed or pay a parking ticket, and it's everyone else who decides that today is the day they're gonna go on a rampage. Where the Joker is a raging homicidal maniac in a world that's mostly sane, the Postal dude is a mostly sane person in a world filled with raging homicidal maniacs. Yeah. He's a self-proclaimed psychopath, but he's also trying to hold social events with people of a similar persuasion instead of acting on his tendencies. He's just a dude. You know, it's been a while since we've had one, so let's take the time to do an anti-sponsorship. For those of you who are new to the channel, this is a time we take to lampoon some terrible or outright sketchy sponsorship offer I've received and then shamelessly shill for my Patreon. Today's anti-sponsor comes from an actual fucking time traveler who jumped a decade into the future from 2011 to ask me if I wanted to join a goddamn multi-channel network. For those of you that weren't on the scene back in the day, multi-channel networks were organizations that presented themselves like talent agencies for YouTube and were a way for channels to get monetized back when it was a very hard thing to do, and offered some protections against the earlier, very flawed versions of YouTube's copyright enforcement system. In reality, most of them just took 20 to 50% of what you got from AdSense and did nothing in return unless you were someone big enough to seriously damage the MCN's image if you were publicly pissed off at them. Everything sort of fell apart though when YouTube loosened the rules on who got to be a partner and then fixed the rules about copyright strikes so that being signed with an MCN didn't protect you. It didn't help things that pretty much every MCN had some sort of controversy about how it handled their partner-client relationships, or if it was machinima, you had standard business days. So this dude rolls up into my inbox telling me about all these great things signing on with the network can offer my channel, which annoys me because 1, I have a disclaimer right in front of my business contact email saying not to contact me with MCN offers because the answer will always be a big fat no. 2, this clown is straight up telling fibs with some of these offers, as these days YouTube protects channels from MCNs and not the other way around. And 3, signing with an MCN is a good way to take a big pay cut for a big fat nothing, forced me to take on terrible deals for stuff like predatory freemium games, which these jerks would probably want a piece of that pie for doing exactly nothing too. It doesn't surprise me that when I went to their website out of morbid curiosity, most of their showcase creators look like they're well under the age of 10 and weren't alive to see what MCNs are normally like. You know that these deals were probably set up by clueless parents who have no idea how to navigate the world of online-based entertainment, who clearly don't have that stage mom thing nailed down yet, because if they did, there'd be no way they'd let any of these hucksters take any of their money, their children's money that they're just keeping safe until they come of age. I reject all these offers, like this one, because I run patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where you can get early access to videos, exclusive content like uncut videos and full recipes for the cooking segments, Q&As, and the ability to vote on what video comes next. If you can't or won't, that's totally cool. The 4K cat clips will be waiting for you on the Patreon if you ever change your mind. Now let's get back to Postal 2. So once you make it to Friday, that's the end of the base game, but there's still a whole lot more of the dude to go around. The first bit of extra gameplay is Apocalypse Weekend, which now comes stock with Postal 2, so much to the point that it's understandable if you didn't realize that it wasn't base game when you started playing and you just clicked on a week in paradise when you started the game. Apocalypse Weekend is the Saturday and Sunday after the events of Postal 2, in which the dude wakes up in the hospital after his accidental gunshot wound to the head and finds that while the apocalypse that started happening on Friday has blown over, a second one is a-coming. The dude finds out he's got a whole new list of errands to run now that he's been out of work for all of 4 days if he wants to keep his job champ and make it to Monday, and things go off the rails pretty quickly as it appears that zombies are a thing now and paradise is starting to implode. Apocalypse Weekend is a lot more linear than the base game, and the start is a little rough to say the least. Most of the game is going from one mission to the next with minimal discretion as to what you want to do. You're kind of just along for the ride and you're often railroaded into certain ways of doing things. Regardless, Apocalypse Weekend is still free with the base game, and if that wasn't enough for you, there's restarting the game on enhanced mode. After you beat the game, it will rework the game with little tweaks that make things a whole lot more wild and crazy. Remember that absurdly powerful sawed-off shotgun you can find in the base game? Well, now it doesn't even have the hang-up of needing to reload every 2 shots and will fire as fast as you can click it, and being able to find it as early as Monday is a near religious experience. Enhanced mode also unlocks cheats if that's your thing. Then there's the full-blown expansion of Postal 2, Paradise Lost, which is essentially Postal 2.5. Paradise Lost takes place 11 years after the events of Apocalypse Weekend, and while the core structure of Paradise Arizona is roughly the same, the maps have been entirely remixed and you've got 5 days worth of new errands to try and do, figuring out what happened to Champ this time. Paradise Lost improves or fixes a lot of the hangups the base game had, like with scarcity of certain items being solved, with Bioshock-inspired vending machines, new weapons, and while it sometimes railroads you into violence, you'll always have options on how you want to do things. Then there's entirely new stuff like the energy drinks that let you dual wield your weapons a la Blood, or how this time running with scissors takes no prisoners in lampooning other game studios. Seriously, they went for the jugular, clowning on Tim Schafer's mid-2010s exploits, and the only recent thing I've seen that comes close to this level of inter-studio violence is that a certain studio known for, horsing around recently published their first major game to early access that feels a lot like a parody or spiritual successor to the Mass Effect series, with a heavy emphasis on advanced hanging out techniques. For real though, I nearly fell out of my chair laughing when I checked out a certain data retrieval quest. Somebody should go check all the local burn wards to see if Randy's pitching a fit over it yet. Then, if you're willing to go in on an early access game, you can play the first few levels of Postal 4 No Regrets janky early access alpha, which according to Civi's videos is up to Thursday right now and still pretty rough around some of the edges. Me personally, I'm waiting for the full release on that one, as I want to do the whole thing in one go instead of waiting for patches and new days to come out. Finally, we've got the original Postal game, which I think comes for free with Postal 2, or at least it came for free with the bundle I got, which included Postal Redux. If you want to play the original, I'd suggest going with the Redux version, as it's a mostly faithful adaptation of the first game, looks and plays a lot better, and also for some reason in the original Postal, I keep on getting stun-locked by Rocketeers. So, Postal 2 is a unique experience that, while is nowhere near the best when it comes to gameplay, is easily one of the best satirical video games I've ever played, thanks to running with scissors mostly refusing to pull punches. And I only say that because there are a few things that they eventually cut out in newer versions of the game, which results in Postal 2 being a for real satire in the sense that it thoroughly rattles the cages of anyone with a scrap of power in this world. Sure, a lot of the humor's dated, but it's so absurd that you can still have a good time without really understanding what they're poking fun at. You can get the entirety of Postal 2, Postal Redux, and the Uwe Ball movie for just over $20 in a Steam bundle that also comes with workshop access for Postal 2, which is a goldmine of content. You know, I think there's something I'm forgetting here. Oh, right. Some of you want to know if I think Postal 2 is an immersive sim. Well, I'm going to start by copping out and saying that it doesn't need to be. Something I've been annoyed about recently with the immersive sim community is that there's a lot of gatekeeping around what is and isn't an immersive sim and what constitutes a good immersive sim. I've had conversations with developers who are making games that could be considered immersive sims who tell me they've had problems with smooth brains fancying themselves as big brain boys, aggressively gatekeeping their projects before they've even hit beta, and it's starting to dawn on me that there's a sizable facet of the immersive sim fandom that thinks it all peaked in 2000 and are vehemently against any and all evolution, iteration, or any other sort of change associated with what is and isn't an immersive sim, and are willing to @mention devs in their own Discord with barrages of messages about how everything that they're doing in their work in progress game is wrong before shilling for their shitty little blogs. If that is the mindset that is associated with being an immersive sim, then for the sake of the reputations of Postal 2, the entire Postal franchise, and running with scissors, Postal 2 is absolutely not an immersive sim, as the community around Postal 2 that I've seen and interacted with so far is too cool and easygoing to let that kind of mindset in. You all wanted hard-hitting commentary about immersive sims, now don't get all watery-eyed now that I gave it to you. However, the types I've mentioned just now are from a small fringe group that mostly come from a certain forum known for exploits so toxic that most of the gaming community at large disavows them. Unfortunately, however, they're actively trying to weed their way into every community to try and get some sort of modicum of control over what they want to see in immersive sims. For everyone else that is a reasonable person that just enjoys open-ended games that have RPG elements and immersion gameplay, Postal 2 has some of the elements of an immersive sim, but certainly isn't a textbook definition like, say, System Shock 2 or a game from the Deus Ex franchise. There are indeed a whole lot of different ways that you can handle the task presented to you, but the majority of those are things that Running with Scissors explicitly intended. Stealth, loud combat, and pacifism are all valid options, even if some are a little more fleshed out than others though. There's also no RPG elements or box stacking, which are staples of immersive sims, but not exactly things that are vital to being one. If I had to call it, for all the cool, reasonable people out there that enjoy immersive sims, I say that Postal 2 is an immersive sim in the loosest of terms, but if you go in expecting something like System Shock 2 or Arcs of Talis, you're gonna have a bad time. However, if you're willing to just take Postal 2 as it is with no preconceived notions about what it should or shouldn't be, and you're willing to accept some dated humor, you'll have a great time going through Postal 2. So that's gonna do it for today. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe with that stupid little bell that does what a subscription is supposed to do in the first place. If you're interested in early access to these videos, 4K cat clips, uncut commentary videos, exclusive updates on what I'm doing, and more, head over to patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where you can help fight the good fight against sketchy sponsorships and ad deals. Special thanks to $10 patrons: American Hoagie, Baby Smasher, Bam Bam, Toxico, Carl with a K, Chili, Moonbuns, Danger Guy, Dead Negator, Destitute, Douglas B, Epic Phil, Eric T, Forbidden Stacks, French Toast, Nice Shorts, Griffin U, Jason Reed. I couldn't do it in one breath. Johan K, Neko the Brave, Niles D, Elisa Nera, Paul D, E, Palinus J, Richard H, Schling Jing, Soviet D, Turtle, Spectate, Technica, Jard, Tor H, and Yannick Z. In the meantime, stay safe, stay indoors, wash your hands and wear your mask, and practice social distancing when you need to go out, and enjoy this cat video. Frisk, you silly. What are you doing? You were upset that I wouldn't let you nibble tissues, so I flipped the tissue box, and now you're rubbing your face all over my, what is it? My world building book and my to-do list. Whoa, you are in a mood. And you know what, I'm just gonna... Could you keep on... There we go. Like you turned on the light with your big wobbly butt. You've pushed the picture of Mommy and me on our first Halloween together dangerously close to going off the desk. Sir, why are you in such a mood? Would you like... Oh, you don't want a pet. You know what, I'm gonna take... Hey. We don't do that. That is mean. I gotta resecure... Because, like, when I do the commentary videos, I'll, just take the mic off. Oh, jeez. And I need to resecure that. Why are you so upset, Floovel? Would you like to play with the drawstring you stole out of one of Mommy's pajamas? Will playtime soothe your anger? Oh, there you go. Get it. Ah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that you just needed some proper playtime. You need to fight something.